The wind remembers everything out here, every promise made and broken, every woman turned away and every man who stayed silent too long. In the wide Wyoming Territory, one choice can change the direction of a life forever. This is the story of the woman they sent back, and the man who finally said, "Stay." Wyoming Territory, autumn of 1874. The wind swept across the open plain, carrying with it a dry whisper of dust and distance, the kind that crept into seams and memories alike. Denton Hollow was little more than a scatter of wooden buildings clinging to the railway like a thought half-finished, but that afternoon the station platform stirred with uncommon life. Children tugged at their mothers' skirts, boots scuffed the packed dirt, and men leaned against fence posts with the practiced patience of those who had learned waiting was part of survival. The afternoon sun slanted low, stretching long shadows that cut across the ground like dark fingers. The train screamed once, metal on metal, and hissed to a halt, steam billowing around the final passenger car until figures emerged like ghosts. From within stepped Maisie Wynne. She descended carefully, one cream-gloved hand steadying herself, the other gripping a modest leather valise worn smooth by travel. Her dress was sky blue, simple and dignified, trimmed in faded ivory at the collar and sleeves. Dust clung to the hem, evidence of the long journey from Missouri, but the bodice was pressed, her posture upright, her chin lifted with quiet resolve. As she reached the platform, a hush rolled through the small crowd. Maisie paused, eyes searching faces until she found them. Mrs. Lockhart stood stiffly near the edge, black lace gloves clasped tight, her sharp gaze already measuring. Beside her hovered Riley Lockhart, barely 20, shifting awkwardly in his boots, and his older sister Miriam, arms crossed, expression bored and appraising. Mrs. Lockhart advanced with the air of a commander surveying ground already claimed. Maisie stepped forward, her smile gentle, hopeful, and extended her hand. "Mrs. Lockhart, I'm Maisie Wynne, thank you for," the older woman lifted a hand, cutting her off without a word. Her eyes traveled over Maisie slowly, lingering on the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the subtle marks time leaves whether one invites it or not. "You're older than we expected," Mrs. Lockhart said, voice flat as a closed door. Maisie's smile faltered. "I'm 28, ma'am." It was written plainly in the letter. 28. The number hung between them. "We were told you were youthful," Mrs. Lockhart replied coolly. "You do not look youthful. You look worn." Maisie felt her breath hitch, her chest tightening as if the air itself had grown sharp. "I'm sorry," she said softly, the apology instinctive though she wasn't sure for what. "We require a bride who can bear children, sons," Mrs. Lockhart continued, folding her gloved hands. "My Riley deserves a young, fertile wife, not a woman past her prime." "I can still, we won't argue," the woman snapped. "You are not suitable." Maisie's eyes flicked to Riley, searching for something, anything, but he looked away, his jaw tight. Miriam rolled her eyes with faint disdain. "Return to your train, Miss Wynne," Mrs. Lockhart said crisply. "This arrangement is finished." She turned on her heel and walked off, Riley hesitating only a moment before following, leaving Maisie standing alone on the platform. A murmur rippled through the crowd, whispers sharp as burrs. "Too old. Poor thing. Came all that way for nothing." Maisie swallowed hard, lowered her gaze to her dust-coated boots, and tightened her grip on the valise until her knuckles blanched beneath the glove. She did not cry. Not there. Not yet. At the far end of the platform, half-shadowed beside stacked crates, Jed Thorne watched. His hat was pulled low, face weathered by sun and years, eyes quiet but keen. He'd come for horse feed and 2 fillies ordered months earlier after swamp fever had torn through his ranch, leaving empty stalls and buried hope. He hadn't expected to witness a woman dismissed like spoiled cargo. Maisie stepped off the platform with measured dignity, face composed though her breathing was tight and controlled. The train hissed behind her, impatient. She passed Jed without looking, and something in her bearing made him straighten. He brushed dust from his coat and followed, careful not to crowd her. She sensed him when his boots crunched the gravel beside hers. "You don't have to say anything," she said before he could, voice low and steady. "I know what it looked like." Jed removed his hat, holding it in both hands. "I wasn't going to apologize for them," he said. She blinked, uncertain. "Just wanted you to know," he continued, voice rough as split wood, "if they don't want you, that's their loss." The words landed heavier than he intended. She stared at him, caught between a laugh and tears she refused to shed. "Thank you," she said quietly, "but that doesn't change the fact I have nowhere to go." Jed nodded once, gaze drifting toward the open horizon, as if weighing something unseen. "I've got a place," he said after a moment. "Few hours west. Quiet. Just me, a barn, and some half-recovered horses." Maisie tilted her head. "Are you offering me work?" "No. I'm offering you rest." Her brow creased. "I'm not looking for pity, Mr. Jed Thorne. And I'm not looking to be saved, Mr. Thorne. I'm not saving you, Miss Wynne. Just offering a roof and time enough to decide your next step." She glanced back toward the train, then toward Denton Hollow. Neither called her name. She nodded once. "All right." Jed gestured toward his horse. "Then let's ride before someone decides to give you more advice." Without another word, she followed him. Dust rose behind them as the train whistled again, and Maisie Wynne did not look back. The ride west unfolded in silence, sagebrush and cottonwoods blurring beneath a sky so wide it pressed against the soul. They crossed shallow creeks, followed winding trails, and spoke only when necessary. By the time the sun dipped low, they reached the ranch. Jed's homestead stood solitary, the house plain but sturdy, the barn weathered, flanked by rows of empty stalls that sighed with the wind like a morning breath. Maisie dismounted slowly, legs stiff, and took it in. "Where is everyone?" she asked. Jed tied his horse, voice low. "Gone. Sold or buried. Swamp fever took most. The rest couldn't work. Had to let them go." Her gaze caught on the paddock where 3 horses moved carefully, injuries evident, and then on a dark bay gelding standing apart, leg bowed, head held proud. Jed followed her look. "First I ever broke," he said. "Thought he'd die that winter." "Why keep him," she asked, "when he's of no use now?" Jed shrugged lightly. "Some things earn the right to stay." Inside the house, dust and old wood greeted her. The kitchen was dim, cobwebbed, stove cold. On a high shelf, a jar of strawberry preserves caught her eye, label curled and faded. Ma's Jam, 1863. She touched the glass, warm from sun, and something in her softened. She explored quietly, noting the care beneath the ware. Jed pointed out a room at the hall's end. That night, sleep came fitful. In the morning, a tin cup of warm milk waited outside her door. No note. No explanation. It appeared every morning after. One afternoon she cut her knuckles scrubbing linens. Jed said nothing, but the next day a polished wooden scoop lay beside the milk, carved with care. Days passed slow and steady. Work filled them, silence stitched with glances. One evening, Maisie sat on the porch writing a letter she never sent. Jed asked gently if she still wrote to him. She spoke of Sam, of waiting, of hope grown thin. Later that night, she saw Jed digging beneath the moon. Curiosity pulled her after he left. She unearthed a small box. Inside were her unsent letters and a note in Jed's hand telling her to live, not wait. She did not confront him. She only found a warm teapot waiting later, with a simple line, "For the throat that's cried." And in that quiet, something began to heal. The town of Denton Hollow didn't boast much, but it had ears, and those ears were sharp. Words traveled faster than horses along the rail line, slipping from the train platform to the tavern, from the general store to the backs of church pews where hands folded and unfolded with judgment. A woman like Maisie Wynne, unwed, no longer young by frontier standards, living beneath a man's roof without kin or contract, was too tempting a story to leave alone. The whispers shifted shape with each telling. She's after his land. No woman stays that quiet unless she's hiding something. Thorne's ranch sits right where the new rail spur might run. She knows it. Maisie heard none of it directly, not in words meant for her ears, but she felt it in the way conversations thinned when she entered the mercantile, in the way eyes followed her a moment too long, then slid away. Even the preacher's wife, who once nodded politely, now offered only a tight smile before turning aside. Maisie said nothing. She had learned long ago that answering every unkind thought only fed it. Jed said nothing either, but the silence between them grew heavier, not empty, but weighted with the things neither quite knew how to name. It was Millie Davenport who finally brought the tension to the porch in broad daylight. Widow of the late Judge Davenport, Millie arrived late morning in a polished black buggy trimmed with silver, lace gloves pristine despite the dust. The horse she drove stepped high, well-fed and proud. She carried a basket of peach preserves and a smile that showed more teeth than warmth. Maisie answered the door, hands still damp from washing. "Mrs. Davenport," she greeted, polite, guarded. My, Millie laughed lightly, extending the basket. "You're prettier than I expected. Not as young, of course, but refined in your own way." Maisie accepted the basket. "Thank you. Mr. Thorne is in the back pasture." "Oh, I'm not here for him," Millie waved her hand dismissively, then leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I'm hosting a gathering Friday next. A little evening for the better sort of town. I would love to see Jed there." Maisie nodded. "I'll tell him." Millie's eyes flicked down to Maisie's apron, her sleeves rolled, skin pink from work. "I do hope he's treating you well. Not many men know how to manage a woman's expectations, especially when she's not family." Maisie stiffened, but kept her expression neutral. Millie's smile widened. "Well then, do tell him." "No need for," she paused, glancing at Maisie's clothes. "Work attire." With that, she swept away, perfume lingering long after the buggy wheels rolled off. Jed didn't mention the invitation until Friday afternoon. "Got asked to a party in town," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. Maisie nodded. "You should go." He hesitated. "You could come too, if you wanted." She smiled politely. "That isn't my kind of place." He studied her a moment longer, then nodded and went to change. That evening, Maisie stayed behind. She set 2 plates at the table out of habit, then ate alone, the second plate untouched. She read by lamplight until the words blurred. When Jed returned, late, the house was quiet. In the morning, she rose early and began packing. She took her time, folding dresses carefully, tying her letters with string, placing everything into the same leather valise she had arrived with. On the nightstand, she left the wooden scoop Jed had carved. The sun was barely up when Jed noticed the light in her room was already out. He stood at her door, lifted his hand, paused, then let it fall. Maisie never said goodbye. Jed never asked why. The silence that followed said enough. 2 days later, the wind shifted. Jed felt it first in the stillness, the air too dry, too brittle. Grass along the southern fence crackled under his boots. By mid-morning, the sky carried a strange tint, as though holding its breath. Jed was in the barn checking bandages on the bay gelding's weakened leg when the scent struck him, sharp and unmistakable. Smoke. He turned toward the north window and saw it, a thick black column clawing up into the sky. Then came the sound, a roar like thunder without rain. Fire had taken the far end of the barn. He shouted, ran, grabbed a bucket before remembering the well pump was too far. The dry hay was already lost. Flames leapt stall to stall. Horses screamed. He pulled the chestnut free first, slapping its flank to send it running. Smoke thickened, burned his lungs. Damn it, he coughed, stumbling deeper. The old gelding stood frozen, eyes wild. Jed reached for the halter. A beam groaned overhead, then crashed down, clipping his shoulder and throwing him hard against the stall. The world spun. Smoke swallowed everything. He couldn't move. Maisie had not gone far. The stagecoach she planned to catch had broken down miles from Denton Hollow. She was walking along the ridge when she saw the smoke rising from a place she knew too well. The ranch. She didn't think. She ran. Skirts flying, valise abandoned in the dirt. By the time the barn came into view, flames licked the rafters. "Jed," she screamed, voice tearing her throat raw. No answer. She flung water uselessly, then wrenched the door open and plunged inside, shawl over her mouth. "Jed," she cried again. A cough answered, weak. She found him slumped in the last stall, blood on his temple. "You stubborn, stupid man," she whispered, hauling his arm over her shoulders. "I've got you. You don't get to die here." Smoke clawed at them as she dragged him through heat and falling embers. Her sleeve caught fire, she beat it out with shaking hands. They burst into daylight just as the roof collapsed behind them. She fell beside him, gasping. "You came back," he whispered. "Of course I did. I thought you were gone." "I was," she said. "Then I remembered you don't know how to take care of yourself. You saved me." "You saved me first," she replied. They lay there as smoke curled skyward. She didn't let go. The barn burned to ruins. 2 days later, smoke still drifted lazily. Jed lay on a cot by the hearth, bandaged and bruised. Maisie moved quietly, tending him. "You could have died," she murmured. "Would have been easier," he said softly. "I didn't think anyone would come back for me." "People leave," he went on. "That's what they do." "Maybe they left because they were waiting for you to ask them to stay," she said. She told him she came back because she wanted to, not from duty. He reached for her hand, tentative. She curled her fingers around his. No promises, just choice. They sat together in the firelight, something fragile and strong settling between them. The autumn air sharpened as the weeks turned, carrying with it the smell of cider and dry leaves, and Denton Hollow prepared for its fall fair the way it did every year, with more effort than cheer. Bright banners were strung between posts, hay bales stacked near booths where sweet cakes cooled and apples filled barrels to the brim. Children ran laughing through the dust, and men argued amiably over prices that would never truly change. But near the train station, the mood was quieter, expectant in a way that made the air feel tight. Maisie Wynne stood at the edge of the platform, shawl pulled close against the breeze, her small valise resting by her boots. Her gloves were already on. The ticket was tucked into her sleeve, softened by the nervous press of her fingers. She hadn't told anyone she was leaving. Not the town. Not him. She told herself it wasn't running. It was moving on, the way she always had when things grew too warm, too real, too close to hurting. The train whistle echoed faintly in the distance, long and low, like something calling across open land. Maisie lifted her eyes to the tracks, then lowered them again. She heard the murmurs before she saw him. Voices dropped. Heads turned. A hush rolled back through the gathered crowd like a slow tide. She turned, heart stumbling, and there he was. Jed Thorne walked with a slight limp, one arm still wrapped tight against his ribs, coat buttoned wrong as if he'd dressed in haste. His face was drawn, bruises fading to yellow, but he was upright. He was there. Jed had never looked like a man comfortable being seen, but he crossed that platform as though nothing else mattered. Eyes followed him, curious, wary, some softened with something like respect. He stopped a few feet from her. "Jed," she began, breath catching. He didn't let her finish. He turned instead to the people gathered there, voice rough but steady enough to carry. "You all saw her the first time she came here," he said, gesturing faintly. "You saw how she was sent away. Told she was too old. Too worn. Unwanted. A few people shifted, boots scuffing. Some stared at the ground. Jed turned back to Maisie, his voice lowering but not losing strength. What you didn't see was what she did after. He pointed toward the distant ridge. She came back into fire and smoke. She pulled me out when no one else would have dared. Not because she was asked. Because she chose to. The wind tugged at Maisie's skirt. Her throat tightened, pulse loud in her ears. Jed took a breath. If they sent you away because you aren't 20 anymore, he said, eyes never leaving hers, then let me be the man who keeps you. Not because I need a wife. But because I need you. The words hung there, raw and unpolished. The train whistle sounded again, closer now. For a moment, no one spoke. Then from somewhere behind them, an old man in suspenders clapped once. Then again. Another joined, then another, until the sound spread, not loud, not grand, but honest. Jed stepped closer, voice meant only for her now. I should have said it sooner. Maisie looked at him, at the man who had offered her silence, shelter, and choice when no one else would. She glanced down at her valise, then let it fall. It hit the boards with a soft thud. The crowd quieted as she stepped forward. She didn't speak. She simply reached out and took his hand. They stood side by side, not because one needed saving, but because they had chosen each other. The fair came and went without goodbyes. Maisie stayed. The whispers faded, replaced by nods and measured smiles. She was no longer the woman sent back, but the one who returned through smoke and fire, not to be claimed, but to choose. The ranch began to mend. Jed rebuilt the barn slower this time, beam by beam, with Maisie handing him nails and steadying boards. Horses returned. 2 foals were born that winter. Maisie opened a small school on the porch for children whose parents couldn't send them far. And each morning, Jed still set a warm tin cup outside her door, even after they began waking in the same room. Spring crept in early. One evening near the end of March, the orchard bloomed too soon. Maisie stood beneath a tree, reaching for an apple that had ripened ahead of its time, hair loose, bonnet forgotten. Jed approached quietly, something hidden behind his back. When she turned, he knelt in the dirt and opened his hand. The ring was rough, darkened metal, solid and worn. Had it made from the shoe off that stubborn old gelding, he said. Figured it had seen enough miles to matter. He lifted his eyes. I'm not asking because you need it. Or because I want to own anything. When I think of home, it's your voice I hear. You were never too old. Just too real for fools who couldn't see. Will you marry me, Maisie Wynne? She didn't answer right away. Then she nodded, tears spilling as she reached for him. Yes, she whispered. Always, yes. The wedding was small, the kind that fit the land rather than trying to impress it. It took place beneath the broad-limbed tree near the rebuilt barn, its branches just beginning to show the pale green promise of spring. The earth was still cool, the grass soft underfoot, and the air carried the scent of new growth mixed with old wood and horses. Children from Maisie's porch school scattered handfuls of wildflowers along the narrow aisle, petals catching in their hair and sleeves as they laughed and ran back to their places. Jed stood waiting in a pressed shirt that strained slightly across his shoulders, his boots polished more than usual, his hands clasped tight as if unsure where to rest them. Maisie approached slowly, wearing a dress borrowed from the preacher's wife, altered carefully by her own hand so it fit just right. It was simple, cream-colored, and honest, like everything else she had chosen to keep. The old gelding stood tied near the fence, a red ribbon looped around his bridle, ears flicking as if he understood he was part of something important. The preacher spoke plainly, without flourish. There were no grand vows, just promises spoken clearly and meant fully. When Jed took Maisie's hand, his thumb brushed her knuckles in a small, grounding gesture. When she said yes, her voice did not shake. In the crowd, Millie Davenport stood apart, dressed in black as always. She said nothing, but when Maisie passed her afterward, Millie inclined her head in a measured nod, a woman conceding without surrendering her pride. Life did not change all at once after that. It deepened. The ranch grew louder, fuller. The barn rose again, stronger, its beams set true. Horses filled the stalls, their breath steady in the mornings, their hooves drumming life back into the land. 2 foals were born that winter, awkward and bright-eyed, wobbling on legs too long for their bodies. Maisie laughed when she saw them, a sound still new enough to surprise her. She kept her school on the porch, children bundled against the cold, letters traced with mittened fingers. Jed listened from the yard sometimes, pretending not to. Each morning, he still left a warm tin cup by the bedside, even when she woke beside him, even when she teased him for it. Some habits, he said, were worth keeping. A year later, the cry of a newborn filled the house, strong enough to rattle the window panes. Maisie held their daughter close, exhausted and radiant. They named her Hope. "Because it's what you carried," Jed said quietly, "and what you gave back to me." Winter settled in again, early and sure. Snow whispered against the windows on long nights. Inside, the fire danced low. Maisie rocked gently in her chair, a book resting open in her lap as her eyes grew heavy. Hope slept nearby, bundled in a quilt, while the old gelding lay on the porch just outside, as if guarding what mattered most. Jed sat by the hearth, mending tack with careful hands. No one spoke. They didn't need to. In that small house beneath the Wyoming sky, with creaking floorboards and soot-stained walls, with warm milk and quiet kindness, Maisie Wynne no longer had to leave. She had already arrived. Love stayed there, not because it was loud or perfect, but because it was chosen, again and again. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you that even in dust and fire a second chance can take root, tap that like button and subscribe to keep the spirit of the Wild West alive. This is Wild West Love Stories, where bullets missed but hearts didn't. Until next time, ride safe, and love fierce.